Coming up on We Talk News this week, what do U.S. Senators Elizabeth Warren, John Fetterman, and Chuck Schumer have in common with Mike Tyson? All are urging President Biden to pressure the DEA on descheduling cannabis. Meanwhile, a mayor in a Minnesota town gets busted for an illegal grow in that new legal adult use state. Plus, the Bay State Report with Chris Ferrone is back this week, and he and I talk about the state of weed in Massachusetts. Plus, a committee of New Hampshire House of Representatives approves an adult use of cannabis bill, but there are still a few more committees to approve it before it gets to the governor's desk. And that's one step forward, two steps backward. We call it Cannabis Standard Time on We Talk News with Elena Pinto. Next.
We are Pro Cannabis Media.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to We Talk News, Pro Cannabis Media's weekly roundup of cannabis news from coast to coast. I'm Elena Pinto. There was a time when cannabis users didn't care if it was a sativa or an indica or even knew what a cannabinoid was. In fact, the only thing that users cared about was THC, the cannabinoid that gets you high. Well, now you have CBD, CBN, CBG, and now an ever-confusing group of synthetics that comes from Delta 8, a synthetic product. You really do need a base of knowledge before you even arrive at an adult use dispensary, right? Well, now that the beverage industry is getting into the cannabis business, you are finding products in liquor stores, gas stations, and convenience stores. And all of those products are derived from hemp, the cannabis plant with less than 0.3% of THC in it. However, if you check the labels, you will find 5 milligrams of THC in the beverage. And since there is no federal regulations for hemp, it's still legal to sell. One of the most respected freelance journalists on the cannabis beat in Massachusetts is Chris Ferrone of the Talking Joints Memo. He and a group of other freelancers released a special report about the challenges in the hemp world, the testing world, and of course, the cannabis world. PCM founder Jimmy Young interviewed Chris for his Bay State Report.
Is hemp going to be regulated like cannabis THC? That's the question.
I mean, really, it goes state by state. And in Massachusetts, the reason we did a Talking Joints Memo is a big 5-part series that came out this week. I encourage anyone to check it out. Way more that we could get into here. But yeah, I mean, Massachusetts is going to have to do something. Well, not necessarily have to, but every state has the choice because there is the 2018 federal farm bill that governs this stuff. Every state can look the other way, or they can manage it a little bit. New York actually came in last year and said, hey, we want to regulate. They can manage it a little bit. New York actually came in last year and said, hey, we want to regulate this. And the court said, no, you had your chance. It's too late. These hemp manufacturers can do their thing because also they were lying about what these products do. So in Massachusetts, big prediction here, Jimmy, since we're cutting to the chase today.
Yeah.
I think we're going to see basically a regulation that says the hemp drinks can continue in liquor stores up to 5 milligrams. At the same time, they're going to let, I think, drink manufacturers in the adult use and certainly in the medical space go higher than 5 milligrams. And I think that's going to be the kind of compromise. As for Delta 8, as opposed to Delta 9 synthetic THC, the states already, the rule already is that you can't have this stuff. So it's kind of like one of those arguments. Do I see serious enforcement coming? No, because it's not that dangerous.
There's quite a bit more of this interview with Chris and Jimmy, and you can find that entire Bay State Cannabis interview on our website, procannabismedia.com. So check that out. In the meantime, you want to know what the latest is on the federal reform of the outdated cannabis laws? Well, stay tuned. Now there is another person who is an entrepreneur in the industry, and it's former heavyweight champion Mike Tyson. Now he's urging President Biden to put even more pressure on the DEA to get the plant descheduled. You might remember a few weeks ago when Senators Elizabeth Warren, Chuck Schumer, and John Fetterman wrote the DEA and urged them not to just reschedule cannabis, but deschedule completely. Well, Tyson's quote in his letter said, quote, President Biden has the power to effect real change. He can right these wrongs and grant clemency to those are sitting in prison for cannabis offenses. We know the failed war on drugs was wrong, and no one should be sitting in jail for cannabis. It's our time. It's time our country moves forward and end cannabis prohibition once and for all, unquote. That's Mike Tyson again. With more from our nation's capital and Maryland, here it is finally Andrew Behringer's report.
I am Andrew Behringer, and this is the DC area report for We Talk News. Pressure is mounting on the DEA to reschedule cannabis as groups cite potential public safety and veterans' health benefits. A coalition of law enforcement leaders and veterans organizations have each sent urgent letters pushing the DEA to reclassify cannabis from restrictive Schedule 1 to Schedule 3. The law enforcement group argues conflicting state and federal laws make policing cannabis complex, hindering response to pressing threats. They contend reclassification would enable better collaboration against illicit markets and more strategic use of resources. Meanwhile, veteran groups say rescheduling could facilitate cannabis therapies for those reluctant to disclose cannabis use when options are limited. They argue integrating cannabis at Veterans Affairs when research shows promise requires DEA action. Advocates span from cops to veterans in citing real-world reasons for policy to catch up to reform. As more welcome the change, pressure rises in this policy stalemate. In Virginia news, Virginia moves closer to legal cannabis sales as lawmakers buy time to broker a retail framework compromise. With House and Senate passing competing bills, a panel delayed review to unite the chambers. A delegate announced that stakeholders are actively crafting consensus legislation that could see votes again this week. Goals include agreeing on licensing rules, equity measures, and launch dates before sending an agreed bill to the governor. Though some provisions seem non-negotiable for patrons, Virginia comes to terms on key issues. Optimistic legal sales may soon launch. I am Andrew Behringer, reporting for We Talk News.
The 23rd state in the U.S. to legalize adult use of cannabis is Minnesota, and those regulations and rules are still being ironed out. But for Mayor Scott Robertson of Winnebago, he couldn't wait. In a greenhouse he owned with his son, Jacob, they started to grow cannabis. The new law allows up to 8 plants to be grown on their property as long as it's not seen by public. The Robertsons put 250 plants into their greenhouse in the fall of 2023, and a tip led law enforcement to ask to see their facility. However, since it's an agricultural product, you have to give advance notice of an inspection. Giving a notification in advance, though, allowed the Robertsons to get rid of their entire operation, but it will not stop legal proceedings against them. Mayor Robertson's term is up this year, and he is not expected to seek re-election. Probably should stay out of public service at this point. Ooh, don't you think? Well, home grow continues to be an issue in many states, including New Jersey, where it's banned for now. The Garden State now has over 100 legal adult use dispensaries that are open, and the Garden State is growing and growing and growing. And that's where Jill Goldsberry reports from every single week. Here she is.
Hello, and cannabis news in New Jersey this week. We've got a reason to celebrate in the Garden State. That's right. During a press conference in Trenton at the New Jersey State Capitol Complex, activists marked 100,000 marijuana arrests prevented as of February 22nd. On-site activists included Evan Nielsen, vice chair of the National NORML Board of Directors, and Martha Figueroa, CEO of Campowerment and founder of Buttercake. She's also the first minority female licensed manufacturer in New Jersey. And I should also mention that NORML is the organization that organized this press conference. And it's significant because prior to 2021, New Jersey arrested about 100 people a day for possession. more than any other substance. And according to Chris Goldstein, the Normal's regional organizer, New Jersey sales are expected to hit over $1 billion in 2024. In other New Jersey news, New Jersey has another cannabis dispensary opening, and in Bloomfield, New Jersey. Blue Oak is the second woman-owned retailer in the state that will open on Sunday, February 25th on Broad Street. 1025 Broad Street will be the grand opening on this Sunday from 12 to 4. Founder Daniel Wildstein, who you should stop by and say hi to this Sunday. And she says that the space is really there to be a place of healing and wellness. So we will check it out and let you know what we think. Maybe we'll see you there. Thanks for watching New Jersey Cannabis. I'm Jill Goldsberry.
There's another plant medicine that is following in cannabis's footsteps for reform at the federal level. It's psilocybin, or mushrooms. It looks like Arizona will be moving forward on their state reform. So here's Karen Black with this week's Arizona Cannabis Report.
I'm Karen Black from Greenfinger Consulting with the Arizona Cannabis Report for Weed Talk News. Arizonans may soon have more options for plant medicine. Picture a place where you could go, sit back, and have medical mushrooms given to you by someone who knows exactly what they're doing. Well, that could soon become a reality. State senators are pushing a bill forward that would make psilocybin service centers a reality. And guess what? There's no list of eligible conditions. They also want to set up an advisory board to oversee the whole thing. And there may be a few things left to iron out, like figuring out exactly where the magic mushrooms can come from and how to help people like hospice patients who can't physically make it to the clinics. This is all building on psilocybin research laws and funds, which cleared the Capitol last year. Cannabis bills, on the other hand, are all over the place. We're talking 16 different bills flying around, and it's hard to keep track of them all. Some have already crashed and burned, as we spilled the tea on last week, and others are hanging by a thread. There are 7 that haven't even budged, and they're probably going to be history after next week. That's right, it's crossover week, where bills either advance to the next round or get left in the dust. I'll have more details for you next week. Some Arizona cannabis companies are bringing home the hardware. LeafLink dropped their list of the top products, brands, and more for 2023. As for some of the big winners, Flow Distribution, Jeter Arizona, and Timeless Select led the pack as top-selling brands. Timeless and Jeter, along with Bake Bros and High Grade, also snagged trophies in product categories. And MSO Mint Cannabis out of Phoenix was honored as a financial innovator. If you're curious about who else made the list of 158 winners across 10 states, hit up leaflink.com for the full rundown. That's all for this week's Arizona Cannabis Report. I'm Karen Black from Greenfinger Consulting reporting for Weed Talk News.
California may still be the #1 cannabis market in the world, but they sure have done a great job of messing up adult use since it was passed a few years ago. However, you have to give that state credit for being proactive now that dozens of dispensaries have closed. Taxation laws are changing, as well as a few other moves that favor the industry. And here's Lavana Vassal with the California Cannabis Report.
I'm Lavana Vassal from the Bay Sesh reporting for PCM with this week's California Report for Weed Talk News. City managers in Southern California's Desert Hot Springs and Palm Springs approved the recommendations of chunky tax cuts. And in Northern California, the community loses an icon of the Humboldt cannabis culture. On February 5th, city managers of Desert Hot Springs unanimously approved recommendations to reduce the cannabis canopy cultivation tax by more than 49%, almost half. Other recommendations included we're adding the ability to create consumption lounges, monthly tax payments, and allowance for lost crop. And on February 8th, Palm Springs Council also approved a 50% reduction on the cannabis retail tax from 10% to 5%. They will not be reinstating a 2% distribution tax, address the double taxation issue through the explicit removal of the state's cannabis excise tax from the definition of gross receipts calculations, among other items. In other news, a cultural icon of Humboldt County, Garth Cultivator, has gone up in smoke. The reclusive cultivator, breeder, rapper, artist, actor, father, and animal rescuer died on Valentine's Day 2024 at the age of 44 when he suffered from cardiac arrest. He produced hundreds of tracks and albums independently funded by his garden, of which he grew thousands of pounds of the finest Humboldt flowers. He is the original weed rapper. His music is genre bending across rap, reggae, dubstep, and more. His lyrics are melodic, emotional, and deep. They tell the story of the grassroots Humboldt cannabis culture from the days when pounds were pushing 5 till the present when they might not even move. Garth is a star of the 2014 independent movie A Sea of Green alongside Be Real of Cypress Hill. When the Prop 64 recreational market hit, Garth Cultivator and Underrated dropped the prophetic record Black Markets Matter, which became the anthem for the struggles of the traditional market in the face of a corporate cannabis takeover. We will miss him dearly. I'm Lavana Vassoff from the Bay Sesh, reporting for PCM with this week's California Report for We Talk News.
Another early adopter in cannabis in the U.S. is Washington State. There is some movement in that state on the current tax structure for cannabis, and here's Matthew Freelander with that story.
Hi, I'm Matthew Freelander, coming to you from the owner's office here at Skagit Organics with the Washington State Cannabis Report for Weed Talk News. We have a bit of a mixed bag this week out of Washington concerning cannabis legislation. The bill to establish a cannabis commission is officially dead. This would have established the nation's first commission on cannabis. Here in Washington. There were many of us in the cannabis industry here that were hoping we would be the first state to do that, but it looks like we will have to continue that work next year. A bill to remove the excise tax for registered cannabis patients off of DOH compliant medical grade cannabis products, Department of Health compliant products, is still on the move, although it just had a committee hearing today, and it was reported to the senators that this bill would have a impact of $5 million on tax collections. Up until today, the fiscal note on this bill was $40,000 because Washington has one of the lowest participation rates of registered medical patients of any state that has a medical cannabis program. There are states that have much smaller total populations than Washington, but that have a much higher participation rate than we do. The state is looking to try to fix that, and this excise tax bill was one solution. Another bill that would change the flat excise tax structure to a potency-based tax structure. This bill would create tiers of tax based on the potency of the cannabis product. So we will see if that continues to move forward. But that's what I've got for you this week out of Washington. My name is Matthew for Weed Talk News. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.
Up north in Canada, they set another sales record in 2023. That country just keeps on chugging along and is now eyeing exports to Europe. So here's Debbie Facey with our Canadian Cannabis Report.
This is Debbie Facey with Weed Talk News, your Canadian correspondent with this week's Canadian strain. So what we have in Canada this week are three main stories. We have in British Columbia, they have decided to allow some licensors, some of the LPs and dispensaries, to open up a safe consumption lounge, which means that consumers are now going to be able to not only consume at home, but they're going to be able to consume in a lounge with their friends, buds, and solo if they would like. This is something that's great for Canada, especially for us wanting to be able to do that in the rest of our provinces, especially here in Ontario. Next, we have we've noticed an increase of 20% of Canadians that have now been administering to the hospital for the cannabis hypermesis syndrome. This is something that isn't necessarily new, but it is new to the industry, especially when it comes to the science behind it. So there isn't that much understanding as to how and why it happens, but we do know that it is happening, and it is something that I'm going to make sure that we and I keep you up on top of what's happening. Next, what we have is Beard Bro Farms and Medican.ca have teamed up to bring the American cultivar here to Canada. This is something that's great for us because of the fact that not only is it a craft cultivar in the States, but it's also going to be something that is going to be new for us here in Canada to not only be a part of, but to also be able to enjoy it. This is Debbie Facey, your Canadian correspondent with Weed Talk News, with your Canadian Straight of the Week. Peace.
There's a big regional cannabis capital conference going on in Los Angeles this week. It's being run by Benzinga and features an all-star lineup of speakers and presenters. This is being called the Cannabis Market Spotlight, a regional event at the Bioscience LA in Culver City. That's where our Oregon correspondent spent the day. So here's Marianne Kersagi.
I'm Marianne from Alibi, on location this week at Benzinga Market Spotlight in Los Angeles. More than 200 attendees are here for this inaugural one-day event. Speakers include the illustrious Seth Yakatan, Anthony Allegrete from 40 Tons, and Joey Brabo from Respect My Region. Topics include brand building, converting customers from the illicit market to the regulated market, and Lauren Carpenter from Embark, a noted California retail chain, will be sharing her retail tips. We've already heard from the team at Glass House some exciting thoughts on future and expansion. A lot of talk today so far about growth and hope. That's this week's Oregon Cannabis Report, on location at Benzinga, LA, for Weed Talk News.
Everyone is waiting somewhat patiently for the DEA's decision about moving cannabis off Schedule 1 of the Controlled Substances Act. The stock market is probably the most attentive, since as soon as something happens, all those cannabis stocks will go nuts. Doug Miller is our guy focused on the cannabis stocks. Here's this week's High on Wall Street report.
I'm Doug Miller from High on Wall Street with this week's cannabis stock report for Weed Talk News. Curaleaf, one of the biggest MSOs, opened a dispensary at the Phoenix airport, which is pretty cool that you can get off your flight and hit the dispensary before you even leave the airport. And Germany, Parliament is voting to partially legalize cannabis, which would be big for Curaleaf because they operate over there. So let's see how the stock chart looks, because it actually caught my eye today on the scanner. So it's trading around $5.15, and it's curling up and it's setting up the run. So watch for dips. And it looks like this news was really good for Curaleaf. Remember, all these cannabis stocks are very risky, so be sure to trade smart and lock in your profits. That's this week's cannabis stock report. Reporting for Weed Talk News, I'm Doug Miller.
Weed Talk News is sponsored by the Union Square Travel Agency, a new travel agency in New York City. This Union Square Travel Agency specializes in journeys of a different kind. They sell cannabis. Visit them at 13th and Broadway in New York City, or log on to unionsquaretravelagency.com. Cannabis can impair concentration and coordination. Do not operate a vehicle or machinery under the influence of cannabis. Concerned about your cannabis use? Text HOPENY or call 1-877-8-HOPE-NY or visit oasas.ny.gov/hopeline.
Here's something that might pique your interest if you are following the mess that is the New York State cannabis market. We've reported for months now that the city has close to 8,000 illegal storefronts, and a lack of enforcement is frustrating everyone but the ones who are in these illegal operations. Now, there are reports that the state has fined some of these stores $25 million, but unfortunately has only collected $22,500. At least that state is offering up licenses again, and this week alone issued 109 adult use licenses. But with more from New York, here's Christopher Smith.
I'm Christopher Smith, reporting from the Jenny's Manufacturing Facility in beautiful Hudson Valley, New York, bringing you the New York Report for Weed Talk News. There's a few small stories in New York this week. There are new stores opening, new dispensaries opening, which is exciting on one hand and terrifying on the other hand. The OCM, the Office of Cannabis Management, has the inenviable task of trying to open stores fast enough so that the processors who manufacture the goods don't starve to death, but not too fast so that they can't actually supply these dispensaries with the products that they need. So it's a balancing act. They're trying to work their way through it, but luckily, finally, we have more stores to work with. That's a good thing. Recently, home grow was approved, or it's on the block. I've always said that I really am not too worried about home grow as a processor, manufacturer. That doesn't really affect me, or it doesn't affect what I'm doing. I don't believe it affects retailers either. I don't believe it threatens retailers. I think it's a good thing. It's a positive thing that anyone who wants to should be allowed to grow the plant in their own home and do with it what they will and make the best of it. It's a very difficult, tricky plant to work with. Many people will fail, or they won't like it, or they realize it smells too bad, or it's too dirty, it's too difficult, and they'll sort of back away from it. So it's going to be a natural selection process. It's nice that the people of New York will have this option. It's a good thing, but it's not really the biggest news. There is one really big story in New York this week, and it's about a guy whose name you might have forgotten at this point. His name is Christopher Wallace. Christopher Wallace died, but he was a member of the Brooklyn community. He was really a founding member of the Brooklyn community, of the hip-hop community. You might know him better as Biggie Smalls. So if you're from Bed-Stuy, if you're from Bushwick, if you're from Crown Heights, Biggie Smalls is one of the biggest names in the community. And where his portraits are around on buildings and in other places around the city, they are revered. No one tags them, no one paints over them. They are revered. He is an iconic character. One dispensary owner in Bushwick, had rented a building, and there was a beautiful portrait of Biggie Smalls on the side of the building. The portrait was probably 10 feet tall and 15 or 20 feet wide. It was a massive portrait of Biggie Smalls as a baby, just the head with hair, and it said Brooklyn in the background. It's an iconic picture. It's been there for a long time, painted by a local artist. Absolutely famous and beloved. The dispensary owner was told that because the picture was of Biggie as a baby, that it might be attractive to children. And so the dispensary owners were told that the picture needed to come down, or they might not get their license. Now, that sort of vague term, that sort of vague government threat is what the OCM used to cover their tracks by saying, we never told them to do anything. We just told them it was a problem. Well, that's just not the way it worked. That's not really what happened. The OCM's veiled threat to this dispensary owner put them in an absolutely terrible situation. Imagine, you spent hundreds of thousands of dollars trying to create a dispensary to bring legal cannabis to a neighborhood that's got plenty of illegal on virtually every street corner. You're trying to create jobs in the community, and you spent hundreds of thousands of dollars on security, on inventory, on fixing up the building, getting ready for inspections and getting ready for operations. And what a terrible choice you have. Take down an iconic picture that you know is beloved by the community, or lose all of that investment and all that opportunity to bring goodness to the community. What a terrible choice. The choice they made was to paint over Biggie Smalls. And you can imagine how that went. Well, it went even worse than that, as a matter of fact. Those dispensary owners had death threats. Imagine being threatened with being killed because you took down an icon of the community. Fortunately, that dispensary was given their license, and then they decided to side with the community. They decided to go with what the community was telling them. Besides the death part, they went with what the community was telling them, and they brought Biggie back. So Biggie is back in Bushwick, back on the side of the building. It's all of its glory. It's an absolutely beautiful portrait and a beautiful picture. OCM came away with a real black eye in this one, and probably should have, for putting the threat on these dispensary owners who were just trying to do the right thing and were caught in a terrible trap between the community and the regulators. It was an awful choice, but it seems to have worked out in the best possible way. The community is happy. Everyone is happy. There's legal product in that section of Bushwick, and it's worked out for the best. So that dispensary is called the Emerald Dispensary, and if you happen to be in the neighborhood, drop by. It's a beautiful shop, and the owners are really fantastic, and they have weathered the storm and awfully well. And I'm Christopher Smith, bringing you the New York Report for Weed Talk News.
And finally tonight, a new survey by NUG, MD, a connector of medical patients to doctors, reports that rescheduling to Schedule 3 may have an immediate impact on the businesses in the industry. The consumer, though, is already eyeing a return to the illegal or legacy market. And 800 people took part in this survey, and a whopping 77% said that if cannabis is rescheduled and the only place to legally buy it would be at a pharmacy, they would return to the legacy market. Lawmakers and bureaucrats alike have completely misjudged the hold this plant medicine has on its users. So think about the fact that for 80 years, where did the 20% of the daily user get their weed? Right? The neighborhood legacy dealer. Well, 55% did say that if the only place to get the legally approved and tested cannabis would be a pharmacy, they would adapt. But this is not the preferred method. And what happens to all those businesses out there right now? It's a never-ending battle for the feds to get these reforms right. And right now, few in the cannabis industry think they can get it right. That's this week's Weed Talk News. I'm Elena Pinto. Remember, it's a whole new world of weed out there. Use it responsibly. We'll see you next time.